So good afternoon, everyone. I see a lot of people are joining the talk. I'll give everyone a few more minutes to join. And while we wait for the talk to fill up, I just ask if everyone can please keep your microphones muted while we have the initial presentation of this session, unless you would like to ask a question. If you would like to ask a question at any time, then please either raise your hand, use the chat or the question and answer forums through Zoom, and we'll give you the floor and you can ask a question during the session. But unless you're asking a question, please do keep your microphones off so that we avoid any interference. So it's a fantastic pleasure today to be able to welcome Tobias Roedel from Nature to give a seminar, and in fact to open up the floor for a question and answer session. So the aim here is to really have a discussion, an engaged discussion, and to have a lot of questions coming from the floor for Tobias. Tobias is currently a senior editor at Nature, where he's responsible for manuscripts in condensed matter physics and material science. He's been at Nature for several years as an associate editor and an editor working in this area of the physical sciences. He is, as many people are at Nature, a researcher at heart, I guess, and by training. He did his PhD at the French Center for Nuclear and Material Sciences, working on topics in material sciences, so working on surface transition of metal oxides, characterizations of surfaces, using synchrotron radiation, working on perovskites and binary oxides, and so really working on hardcore material science topics. So he has the background and heart of a scientist, worked as a postdoc briefly, and then moved into scientific publishing, where, as I said, he's now responsible for the condensed matter and material science part of the publishing in Nature. So he has a brief presentation that he's going to give to us today, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience for Tobias. And if anyone has a question during the presentation, then you're welcome to put your hand up or send a question through via either of those chat or question and answer channels, and we'll pass it on to Tobias and he can answer it as we go. Tobias, it's a very great pleasure to have you today. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. So I'll give you the floor, and I'm looking forward to the presentation and the discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rob, for the kind introduction. And also thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be part of this discussion. And yeah, hello to everyone. I know it's Friday afternoon, so the weekend is approaching, so I appreciate that you take the time to participate in this discussion. And yeah, I hope that you really approach it as a discussion, because I don't want to give a formal presentation, because I think it's maybe quite boring. And feel free to ask any questions that you have on the journal Nature, but also other journals of the Nature family, like Nature Physics or Nature Materials. You can also ask questions about scientific publishing as a whole, about the editorial process, how we make decisions, how the peer review works from our perspective, and also questions about the job of an editor, if you would like that, or if you can envision to work as an editor yourself, you can also ask questions about that, of course. And the structure of the talk, I will first talk a bit about Nature and the other Nature journals, and then I will focus on the editorial process. And yeah, I hope that you have many questions. But before coming to publishing, a little bit about science. I mean, this summer school is very much about correlated moiré materials. And I'm sure you're aware that there are also many Nature publications on this topic. And the reason why Nature covers this topic so much is mainly twofold, I would say. So one main reason is that, I mean, the mechanism behind superconductivity has been discussed in the condensed matter community for quite a long time. So the unconventional superconductivity in high TC group rates or iron-based superconductors is still not understood. And with the discovery of superconductivity in magic angle twisted bilayer graphene, there was the hope that maybe the superconductivity in this system might give new insights in unconventional superconductivity. So there is this strong interest from a physics perspective. And then the second reason, which is more important to us, I guess, is that it really talks to a lot of different communities within the condensed matter community. So researchers working on 2D materials are very interested on correlated physics and also on topological physics. Everyone basically finds interest in this topic. And in nature, we are looking for these kind of fields, the fields which really touch a lot of different communities. And here I just show very briefly like a short overview of the development of the field, like let's say over the last 3 years. And I mean, of course, there were many Mare papers before superconductivity was discovered in the system, but then the discovery of correlated phases and superconductivity really boosted the field, and now it's really a focus in many research groups around the world. One main issue of the field is unfortunately the sample fabrication, which is very challenging. So to have an homogeneous twist angle distribution and a high sample reproducibility is not given yet. So this is one of the reasons why the first papers following up on this discovery actually come from theory, because experimental groups need to catch up in the fabrication process. And by now we have many experimental papers, which I categorized in 3 different categories. So one presents alternative platforms. We heard about it this afternoon. So for example, ABC graphene, twisted double bilayer, twisted mono bilayer, transition metal dichicogenides, and the list goes on and on and on. Now also polaritons, for example. And then another category is mechanistic insights and local properties. So one reason why local properties are even more relevant is that the samples are not homogeneous in twist angle, for example. And just earlier this week, or was it last week, we published a paper by Dima Efitov and his group at ICFO, studying the relation between the correlated insulating phase and the superconducting phase. And the third category is new electronic phases. So it's not only about superconductivity, but also about ferromagnetism or Chern insulating phases. So I find, as an editor, I find kind of interesting to follow how these fields develop. But in this talk, I don't want to talk about science, but about publishing. And of course, there are many different publishers which you can choose to submit your papers to. And Springer Nature is only one of them. And they all have different publishing philosophies. So at Nature, we only have professional editors, which means that we don't have ties to any academic institutions, which makes us a little more independent in our assessments. And then we also strongly screen papers. So of all the papers that are submitted to us, we only send out like 10 to 20%. And yeah, we only want to be to publish the best of them. Okay, what this means is debatable, but maybe we can talk about this later on. And as I'm sure you know, Springer Nature is a private company, so a for-profit organization. You can see this critical, but for me, it's not that problematic, because in the end, we try to earn this profit by providing the best services possible to our authors, and also by communicating the results to a broad audience. And I mean, there are mechanisms to make sure that we don't make too much money, like there's the competition with the other publishers, so that we don't only get public money without any return. There are many publishers and there are also many journals in the Nature family. So I work for Nature, which strives to publish the papers with the widest importance and implications. And then you have kind of a pyramid of different journals with a little less significance of the results. So you have the Nature research journals like Nature Physics or Nature Materials. And then we have various open access journals, Nature Communications, communications journals, and scientific reports. A little more on Nature, which is the journal I work from. So I mean, my main job is to filter manuscripts and to pick out only the most significant ones. And I think what makes Nature a little special is not only its reputation, but also that we try to really be at the interface between science and society. So it's not only about publishing the academic papers, so your results, but also presenting them in a way to make them accessible to a broader audience. And the way we do this as Nature is that we have like a specialist at every step of the process. So you produce the results, then the manuscript editors, so me, we do the filtering, and then we also work very closely with science journalists who are working for Nature, and they are really the experts in how to communicate complicated science to a broader audience, to the public. You don't have to do it this way. I mean, nowadays the researchers can directly tweet their results or use social media to talk to the public. But this way is the Nature way is an expensive one, but I think has a lot of advantages as well. A little more of how we see our role in scientific publishing. So as I said, filtering is essential. And then we also, to make the papers better, I mean, an essential process in making the paper better is peer review. But on top of that, we have other editors like journalistic, copy and art editors who also make this, your paper or your results as accessible as possible. And then in the end, we amplify your results because at Nature, especially, we are in the fortunate position to have a very good reputation. So that is why our published results have a very far reach. I mean, many media outlets pay attention to what Nature publishes. And I want to make a little emphasis on how important filtering is and ask you this question, like, how many scientific papers do you think are published each year? And how many of them do you think you read? Okay, I give you a short moment to think about the numbers. So the numbers are huge, of course, and I realize these numbers are across disciplines, but nevertheless, I think it's quite instructive. So 2.4 million scientific papers are published each year. And researcher reads about 1 per day max. So
we have a problem, no?
Yes, we do. Tobias, can you hear me at all?
It's cut.
We still have the slides. Mercedes, are you in contact with Tobias?
Send him an email saying that we cannot hear him.
Yes, sorry?
Are you in contact with Tobias? Where he's cut out.
He's in.
But we can't.
We cannot hear his vote. He has muted himself, maybe. Can you check it?
Okay.
No, he's left. Bear with us, everybody. We'll get Tobias back on the line as quickly as we can, and keep going with the webinar. And please, I do encourage questions. The webinar will be much more interesting for all of us if you have questions along the way and questions for him towards the end. So please don't hesitate to put your hand up or chat through the chat channel or the Q&A channel while Merce works to get Tobias back online.
I just sent him the link to connect, and maybe he has a connection problem and that's why he was out. I'm gonna try for him to reconnect as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you, Merce. Otherwise, Magic, you're going to have to take over and tell us about your extensive experience with publishing in Nature.
I'm sorry, but this is not true. I mean, the Frank or Dima are much better people to tell you. I mean, I'm a theorist, so I usually have no chance to publish in this journal. Dima is here. He could.
I'm here, but I'm just starting. I wish Frank would be here. Then he has much longer experience than me. So this is the first time we have an interruption like that, right?
It's a first. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully he's probably at home, so his internet may be turned off or so.
So while we're waiting, we do have a question coming through in the Q&A, but I don't know who it's from. Someone says, seriously, that would be very helpful. What is the criteria to select 20% paper that will send out for review? Well, we have some questions coming through. Whoever put the question, seriously, that would be helpful. Put your hand up and ask the question. I'm not sure what you are getting at.
Obviously, this process of selection is very hard. And it's...
oh, he's back. He's back.
Ah, he's back. Okay.
Yeah.
Tobias, do we have you again? Connection's coming, but not yet through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, there it is.
There we have. Hi, Tobias.
Yeah, sorry for that.
That's okay. We lost you for a minute. We have a couple of questions from the floor coming through, so we've taken advantage of the time.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's the problem of home office, I guess.
So would you like to share your screen again and pick up again from, you were telling us about the number of publications around the world and asking how many papers we typically read per day. Dima was saying that he gets through 15 per day.
Oh, okay, that's
all of them theory.
I guess that's what you have to do.
This is half of them string theory. No, actually, no. One per day sounds. I mean, actually, reading full papers, that's actually maybe maximally one per day. But looking through papers, that's of course much more.
Yeah, very true.
So let's keep going. Tobias, you have one question from the floor asking what criteria is used to select the 20% or so of papers that will be sent out for review. So I guess this is a topic that you'll get to as you go through your slides, but that was one of the questions that was coming through.
Yeah.
So I'll give the floor back to you, and please.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me know about the question, and yeah, sorry for the interruption. I mean, I can already talk a little bit about this question now because I realize, okay, this is like the most controversial part maybe of my job, like how do we make our decisions? And there are criteria, like for example, we want papers which provide a conceptual novel phenomena. So as an example, like the superconductivity in magic angle graphene, this was really surprising. I mean, there were theory papers before predicting interesting electronic properties and showing that there can be flat bands at certain angles. But this results really in superconducting properties came to a surprise. So this is really something okay. These are the breakthrough papers. But of course, we not only publish the breakthrough papers, but also the papers which are still great science, but not as surprising as, for example, this paper. So, I mean, conceptual novelty to some degree still a must, and there are of course different degrees of how novel something is, because to a certain degree every result is new if you didn't do exactly the same thing than another research group. But it's not only about conceptual novelty, it's also about the implications of the results. So basically, to whom are the results interesting? Is it only like a very specialized community, or to a much broader part of, for example, the condensed matter physics community? And as I mentioned earlier, the reason is why we publish many of these MARE papers is that they are of interest to many different research fields: 2D materials, correlated physics, topological physics. So these are like the two main criteria: implications and conceptual novelty. But that's not the only ones. I mean, these are the ones for fundamental physics, but we can also publish a paper which doesn't show something very novel, but it has, maybe it breaches a technological bottleneck. So you optimize a certain fabrication process, or your device in a certain way, and then suddenly the performance is so good that you can really make applications based on this device. And yeah, I mean, I think I leave it like that because I will come back to that later. And yeah, now I will start to talk a bit about the editorial process, if you don't have questions on this previous topic. And I mean, here's the overview of how the editorial workflow looks like. So when you have results, you submit your papers to us, and then the manuscripts are assigned to us, like our team leader assigns the manuscripts according to our specialties. And we get about 10 papers per week, which means 2 a day. So really have the time to read the papers thoroughly. And then we make a decision, and the decision is basically made on, okay, I write a report on each of the papers I receive. I summarize the papers, and then I try to figure out if it's significant enough for us or not. And this process, I mean, touches on what I just talked about. So is there enough novelty? Is there enough implications for us or not? Usually we make this decision within a week, and then the decision is either, okay, I send it out to review, or I reject the paper. As I said, we send out about 15% of our papers, so the vast majority is rejected. And once they're out for peer review, I come to the details later. Then we make the next decision based on the reports that we get from our referees. And then I have 3 options: reject, revise, or accept. And in the end, we end up publishing 7 to 8% of the papers that are submitted to us. So we are very selective, and we filter out most of the papers. And yeah, I mean, we are really happy to publish the papers we publish, and I enjoy working at Nature because there's really a lot of fantastic science which I can read daily. And now I will go into the details of this process, like every step. And okay, this will be a bit boring, but I hope that you ask many questions, because then I can really understand what you're interested in.
Tobias, may I ask a question before you move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to your opinion here. So it looks like you keep 15% or so of papers for this review process, and about half of them end up getting published. I'm curious as to your opinion about where the most important filtering stage is here. Do you think that there's a self-filtering at the submission stage, which is also significant? So do you think that there are good papers out there that people never submit that you would seriously consider and that would at least get into your review stage. But for whatever reason, the authors decide not to go down that process?
Yes, it can happen, but I think it's more the exception than the general rule. And in general, I think like the scientific community knows quite well where to submit their papers. So the first screening is done by the researchers themselves, because they decide, of course, to which journal they submit. And I mean, they do it quite well. They have a feeling to what is important and to what not. And of course, I realized there is a lot of pressure to publish in these high-profile journals. And so it's not only like this, let's say, an objective discussion we have to discuss, but they also have the pressure to publish in these journals. But yeah, there is a screening by the scientists, and then the second screening is done by us, by the manuscript editors, and then another screening is done by the peer reviewers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can I also just one quick question?
Yeah.
So I noticed that really, I don't know if I noticed this in the last 10 years, but recently I noticed also there are many more Nature editors also attending the key conferences, like you, for example, in this case. So is this also a big sort of a big part of this, that you try to really educate yourself what is really going on in the fields even before you get the publications submitted to your journal? And is this a new development, or is this I just missed this in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a two-way process. I mean, yes, we want to educate ourselves. That's why we go to conferences, and we have been doing this, I think, for a long time by now. I mean, one reason why it's maybe more obvious is that the number of editors is increasing because we have more journals. For example, with Nature Communications, there are many editors working for them. So yeah, we try to inform ourselves of what is most important, because if you're only reading the manuscripts, you risk being in your own bubble to some degree. So that's why it's important for us to talk with researchers and also attend conferences. And then from the other side, we also want to be approachable or accessible to the scientific community. So we don't want that there's this black box, you submit your manuscripts and then you get either a rejection email or an acceptance email. No, we want really that researchers understand how we make our decisions, and just get a dialogue going between us and the scientific community.
We have another question coming through from the floor, Tobias. Again, so when the questions come through to me in the Q&A comes from an anonymous attendee. If the person who asked this question would like to put up their hand, I'll give you the floor to ask the question yourself. So the question's, what makes the difference between nature and science? Is there any advantage of being European or American researcher or based in one of these continents for one or the other of the two journals? If the person who asked this question wants to put up your hand in the participants list, I'll give you the microphone to ask your question to Tobias. But this was the question that was put to you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the question. I mean, the location of the research institute or the researcher is completely irrelevant to us. So it doesn't matter if you are a US citizen or doing your research in one of the US American institutions or European institution. It doesn't matter. This is not a criteria for our decision. When it comes to science or nature, it's I mean, I like a lot the work done at Science and the manuscripts they publish. It's more about personal preference of the researchers. And I mean, I don't want to talk negatively about Science, and I don't have to say anything negatively about them. And I can just say, at Nature, we try to make our decisions fast, and also to give you, to give your work the audience that it deserves. So yeah, we try to let our science journalists work on your work so that they can give a different angle or a different perspective on that. So yeah, I mean, in the end, it comes down to personal preferences between science or nature.
Thanks, Tobias. Another question's coming through, but you might address this in your next set of slides, which is about, apart from the validity of the scientific claims, what are some other reasons for rejections during the peer review stage? You said you were going to go into a little bit more detail now, so maybe this will come up in the discussion anyway.
Okay, I will keep the questions, the question in mind. So reasons for rejection. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, let's go through this step by step. Maybe some key takeaways. So I mean, now I'm talking about the nature research family as a whole. It's nothing specific to nature. This is also valid for nature communications, for example. Yeah, I mean, the main message is get your main message across, I guess. This is really important to us, for the editors, make it clear what the main result is. And that's very early on already in the abstract. And yeah, we will try our best to guide you through the editorial process. We look for papers with potential. So sometimes we realize that the results are maybe a bit preliminary, but we still might decide to send them out if we believe that the results can improve during peer review, so that additional experiments might help in making the claims more robust. And then we will be happy to publish the paper. And in the end, it's the editors who take a decision. So we don't just count votes of the referees. And the main goal of peer review is really to improve your papers. So try to approach this process in this constructive spirit. And yeah, if you ever get a revised decision, try to make the most out of it. Don't rush to submit a revised version, but really take into account what the referee said. And if you're not happy with our decisions, which I assume happens quite often, you can always appeal our decision, and then we will take a second look at your work. And as I showed you, there are many nature journals in the Springer Nature family by now. So we can also consult with editors of other journals and help you to transfer your manuscript to a different journal. So the first step of this process, and yeah, please ask questions to any step I talk about, is get your main message across. When you write the paper and when you submit it, it doesn't have to be in nature style. So don't worry too much about format, but really worry about the science. And of course, you should familiarize yourself with the editorial and publishing policies. And then one important thing is the cover letter, which I will talk a bit in more detail. So please write the cover letter, and it's really your chance to talk to me or other editors in a confidential manner. Try again to explain the importance of your findings, but not just by repeating what you write in the manuscript, but try to broaden the context a bit. So for me, the most important thing in the cover letter is really to contextualize your results. So this can be done in different ways. For example, you can briefly summarize how the field developed over the last years. And then you write, okay, and now my results do this and this in this context. Or you can also contextualize your results and tell me what you think or how it will impact the research community, or not only the specialists working on the very same problem, but also researchers working in other fields, which still might find your results interesting. So really, the cover letter is about putting your results in context. And then, okay, there are more technical aspects, like you can suggest reviewers. More importantly, you can exclude reviewers if you feel that there is a conflict of interest or they are competing with you to have the same results. Yeah, and please tell us about related papers or competing papers.
There's a question from the floor which might be relevant at this point, Tobias, which was a question about negative comments from referees and the comparison between, so how are do the editors interpret negative comments from referees that are recommended by the authors, as opposed to referees who are not recommended by the authors? Is there a difference in how the referee opinions are dealt with depending on whether they are recommended at this stage, I guess?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And usually we take the easy way out, and that means we try to avoid the situation. So actually we don't follow the reviewer suggestions by the authors in a first trial to find referees. So you just suggest a couple of referees, but these are not our priorities. First, we will try to find referees which are not in this list, because we don't know exactly what the relation between authors and suggested reviewers is. And because otherwise we would come in the situation that we have to read too much between the lines. I mean, that's something we have to do anyways, but we try to avoid it. And usually I almost never invite reviewers which are suggested by the authors. And then it's a really case-by-case decision. I mean, it's very difficult to give a general answer if you do it differently. No, it really depends, because reviewers, if you know the reviewers, they also have their different styles. Some of them, they are very challenging, even if they find the paper great. Others are very positive, even if they have a lot of criticism. So then it comes really down to the specific example.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, then move on.
There is a question there saying, then what's the meaning of providing suggested referees if you don't actually use them?
Yeah, I mean, they're helpful to us. If we don't find anyone, then we will go back to the suggestions. So yeah, they are helpful, just not our first choice. And they're even more helpful if I deal with a paper on a topic which I'm not very familiar with. But if I know the community very well, then I can come up with alternatives myself very quickly. Yeah. So yeah, good question. I mean, please keep suggesting reviewers, but don't expect that we take them. Okay. So yeah, I mean, on this we touched already a little bit on. So the initial editorial evaluation. So how it works, I mean, as I told you, I write the report, I make my recommendation, and then often like a colleague of mine also takes a look at the manuscript and agrees or disagrees with me. So usually there are two editors looking at your work. And sometimes it happens that we go back to the authors because we need some additional information before we make a decision. And as I said, we try to make a decision within a week. Is there a question, Rob? Or?
Yeah, there's a question which I guess fits into somewhere between the submission and review stage. The question is there any advantage to send a pitch about the research before writing the paper to you as an editor in order to check whether that topic, that field are appealing to be published in Nature?
Yeah, it can be useful if you really don't know if it's if you publish papers like this or not. We have this option of a pre-submission inquiry, and authors also send me emails. In many cases, what the authors do is that they send me an email when the paper is almost ready to be submitted. But it's also useful to contact us at an earlier stage. I mean, I can give you some feedback, but of course nothing completely conclusive, because it's difficult to make a decision just based on a pitch and without seeing the full manuscript. But I can tell you, yeah, please submit your paper to us or not. Yeah. So it does make sense, I guess, is the short answer.
And then related also to this stage of the editorial review, how does the editor avoid discarding an important paper that doesn't follow a currently fashionable topic like the twistronics at the moment?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I know that we get sometimes this criticism that we only publish the fashionable stuff and not the other papers. And the answer is, I mean, the very good papers, the advance should be clear, independent if they are fashionable or not. So yes, we have our papers in which we, or topics in which we publish a lot of papers, like the twisted systems at the moment. But I mean, yeah, as if there's another paper in a field which is not fashionable, of course I want to publish it, and we still have the same criteria to evaluate these results. And then it's basically a matter of proportions. I mean, we publish a lot of papers on the topics which are really of interest at the moment, and then a smaller portion is on the significant advances in no matter what field.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good question. It's, yeah, we strive to have a balance between publishing what is interesting and what is a significant advance, maybe in a very specific subfield of physics. Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay, great. Yeah, I think I was here. Okay, then I continue, right? Or the other questions? Yeah. Okay.
There's some questions, but about the peer review stage. So I'll raise them in the next step.
Yeah. So this goes back to the previous questions, I think. I mean, what are you looking for when we evaluate our papers? Yeah, the significance of the findings, the relevance of the journal's readerships, which is in nature not the case because we are multidisciplinary journals, so for us a paper is never out of scope. And of course, it's not only about claiming something spectacular, it's also about having the data to support these claims. And as I said, we focus quite a lot on conceptual novelty, but we can also publish a paper providing a mechanistic insight on a problem which has been debated for a long time. I mean, if someone would figure out the mechanism for unconventional superconductivity, we'd be very happy to publish it, obviously. And yeah, it can be also not so fundamental, but also go more in the direction of society or technology. Yeah, it really depends on what the community itself finds the most interesting. And yeah, some more ideas of how to think about significance of your work. So it can address an important question, tells us something new or surprising. The quality of the data is of course also of importance to us. And it's really important for us that the papers also discuss alternative explanations, especially in correlated materials. I mean, it almost never happens that there's only one explanation for a certain phase or phenomenon, because yeah, you have these different degrees of freedom playing all a role in forming these phases. And then there are always alternative explanations. So please don't try to hide alternatives, but discuss them in an honest manner in your manuscript. And then this question, is it all about impact, which goes a little bit back to this question about being fashionable. If you define fashionable by the number of citations a manuscript will get. And no, it's not. It's one indicator which we of course also look at, but we also publish paper which don't get cited a lot just because we find the science fascinating. I mean, we are editors, we are were scientists. We're still passionate about science. So if we like something, we will publish it or send it out to peer review. And then the number of citations is not important to us. Okay, and then of course we can reject your paper. And now we come back to one of the questions, the reason for rejection. Okay, so out of scope, yeah, doesn't happen that often. Often, if there's not enough novelty, it means that we compare result to the literature and there are similar results and we think it's not enough of an advance for us. Often the reason for rejection is also that, okay, we think that the claims are spectacular, but the experimental evidence is just not there. Maybe there's some theoretical mechanistic insight missing or more experiments to strengthen the claims. These are all potential reasons. And yeah, I mean, the short answer is, of course, if they don't fulfill the criteria, which I talked about earlier. And I mean, this is, I mean, as I said, we reject 85% of the papers. So often I have to reject a paper which I like, but yeah, we have to be selective. And the easy decisions are on the very good papers and the very bad ones. But there's a lot of ground in the middle between the two extremes, and then it's really you can see it both ways. Okay, so we can start about talking about peer review if there are no other questions on this.
Yeah, there's no question about the rejection process, but also there's a question about the choice of referees, which might be relevant here, which is how do you choose a referee for a paper that presents results which call into question previous works, given that the referees responsible for these other works might be biased against the contradictory claim?
Yeah.
Does this arise very often, and how do you deal with that type of conflict or potential for conflict?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, usually I will talk about this a little later as well, but I can already answer this question now because it fits perfectly to peer review, the peer review section. And the short answer is, I guess, I try to balance out like different viewpoints. I mean, I want a reviewer to be critical, but not too critical. And the way I deal with it is usually by inviting 3 reviewers. So I wouldn't mind inviting one reviewer whose results, the new results challenge. But then I tried that 2 other reviewers are much more balanced. And then when I read the report of the criticized reviewer, or not the reviewer is criticized, but his results, then of course I paid attention in his tone and his or her tone. How do they react? Do they take it personal? Are they objective? Are they too critical? So yeah, the short answer is trying to invite at least 2 other reviewers who are more neutral, presumably, and then reading the reports with this additional information in mind that, okay, there might be bias, there might be not. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I guess I continue from there. So yeah, the peer review is the cornerstone of scientific publishing. And of course, I want to thank all our reviewers at this point, because without them, we wouldn't exist. And yeah, the editors pick the reviewers. And of course, we look for unbiased reviews. But as I just said, sometimes the expertise fits so perfectly that I might accept a little bias. But usually we try to avoid any conflict of interest. And as I said earlier, the decisions are made by us and not by the reviewers. And you also try different forms of peer review. So peer review can be done in various ways, and all of them have advantages and disadvantages.
So there's a couple of questions which address exactly that point there coming from the floor, Tobias. One is just, will double-blind peer review be a default in the future? And another, which is very related to that, is do you think that making all papers necessarily anonymous would actually improve peer review impartiality? With the comment that I believe some reviewers can make a personal bad judgment when facing an excellent paper from a group that is not so important. So both are relating to anonymity or double-blind peer review, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about double-blind peer review first. I mean, yeah, in principle, I think it's a very good idea because it can eliminate bias. The problem is that often if you have an expert who is really familiar with this field evaluating a manuscript, they can guess often from which group this result might originate. It's always related to how the paper is written and like what reference you pick. So double-blind peer review is an option which you can choose. But yeah, the data says, okay, the reviewers, the authors are not so interested in it. So it's an exception that the authors ask for double-blind review. So it seems that the community doesn't seem it necessary to have this option. I cannot give you numbers, but it's I think easily below 5% of the papers that I received that ask for double-blind peer review. And then talking about anonymity, it's also about why we think it's better that reviewers are anonymous. And I mean, recently this has been under debate. I mean, the advantages are that it reduces the opportunities for favor trading. It helps scientists to stay colloquial, so they don't feel the pressure to have like a perfect report. And it corrects for power imbalance. So if you have a young researcher assessing the work of a big name in the field, of course, the young researcher can fear that having a negative comment on this big name's work, that their career might suffer from it. So these are reasons why peer review reviewers might choose to stay anonymous. That being said, since February this year, Nature offers transparent peer review. So all manuscripts submitted to us after February this year can be in this transparent peer review scheme. What it means is that the author decides if the reports of the reviewer should be published, not the names, just the reports. And reviewers can sign the reports if they want. So if they want to leave being anonymous, they are free to do so. And at the moment, we don't publish, we publish the reports, but not the editorial correspondences or the decision letters. But this might be implemented in the future. So yeah, I mean, we have double-blind review, transparent peer review, and we try to figure out what works best or what the community is like. And it's, for me as an editor, it's also interesting to see that different communities have very different preferences when it comes to the style of peer review. So it's very much community dependent, and it's difficult to find the one-fits-all kind of solution.
Another question. Okay, so I wanted to ask about the reverse side. So what do you expect from a reviewer's report? Because there's obviously a huge spectrum of people who just maybe give a very quick opinion, and people who write maybe 3 pages and make many different suggestions and ask a lot of questions. And I think what I've definitely noticed is that the reports are much more detailed in Nature than in other journals. So for example, for a PRB, sometimes the reports are much shorter, and for Nature, people try really hard to do their homework properly. So what's your preference?
I mean, my preference is, of course, a longer report. I mean, sometimes we receive reports which are only like, okay, 5 lines or something like this, which is obviously not very helpful. And, but as you say, I mean, it depends on the reviewer. Like some of them are very concise, some are more open to discussion. And I mean, in the end, it's not about the length, but about the content. I mean, it should definitely touch on different aspects. So it should touch also about the significance of the work and if they think it's suited for Nature, why or why not. But the most important part, of course, is like the technical aspects, because that's something I cannot assess in detail. And ideally, the reports are written in a constructive way. I mean, not like, okay, this very critical style that you have the impression that the results are completely wrong. No, trying to improve the results, suggesting maybe alternative experiments or more theoretical work. The constructive reports are the best ones. So even if you don't believe the results yet, suggest ways how the authors could improve it. I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I got a little lost. Is there another question, Rob, on the peer review or?
Well, yeah. So there's a question that was raised here. What's an indicator of referee bias for you that comes up in this context?
Yeah, it's really about the language used. I mean, I realize that, I mean, we're also passionate about science, and sometimes, okay, you read something with which you don't agree at all. And then you can have quite a strong opinion on the importance or the correctness of the result. But it comes down to language, which language you use. Are you confrontational or more constructive? That's basically our way to try to figure out bias. And of course, we have this, we know the identity of the reviewer. So we can also check if there are like potential conflict of interests. If the research group is working on something very similar. Yeah, these are also potential information about bias. Yeah. Okay, then maybe I can skip most of the slides about peer review, I think, because we talked about most aspects. Maybe just this anecdotal story about Albert Einstein not liking peer review at all. So back in '36, he submitted his paper on gravitational waves to physical review. And then his answer was, I will just read what he wrote. Dear sir, we had sent you our manuscript for publication and had not authorized you to show it to specialists before it is printed. I see no reason to address the, in any case, erroneous comments of your anonymous experts. On the basis of this incident, I prefer to publish the paper elsewhere. So yeah, these were different times of science. By now, peer review is really standard, and you cannot afford just to say, okay, I don't want it. And the process itself is debatable. As our discussions just showed, there are different styles to do it, but it's still very essential to do it. I mean, just putting papers on preprint servers and then see what happens, I think is not a good solution for science. So we talked about this, anonymity, talked about this, how we choose reviewers. We already touched on this. I'm just checking the points if I forget something. Yeah, because this came up earlier. I mean, as I said, we don't necessarily use the suggestion of reviewers for reviewers, but we always honor the author exclusions. So we will never contact the reviewers which you excluded, except you give us a list of 20 researchers, and then it's just too many. And yeah, we usually use 3 reviewers. I also touched on this. I mean, for a typical example for papers on more materials would be experimental papers would be to have 1 theoretician, 1 experimentalist being an absolute expert on the topic, and then a 3rd one of someone who's a little bit outside of the direct research question, but still interested in this field. And then, yeah, this question, the left side of the slide comes back to the question of Dima. Yeah, a good reviewer has a good attention to details, but at the same time, this big picture view of how the science, the results fit into the advance of the field. And yeah, most important thing is being fair and constructive. I think there's nothing to add here. Let me briefly check. Yeah, this is about what reviewers assess. I mean, okay, if you have any question on that, just ask me. Otherwise, I will just skip it. By the way, how are we doing in time? I mean, I'm happy to answer any remaining questions.
We're getting to the end of the time that we're designated for this, but that's partly because we've had an interruption regularly for different questions.
Yeah.
But I do think we should try to wrap up reasonably quickly. So I'll keep inviting questions from the floor, put them in now so that Tobias can address any questions that anyone might have. The only question that's open here today is, at the moment, is reasons for rejecting at the peer review stage, apart from validity of the scientific material presented. But I guess you've touched on that somewhat, and we'll do so now.
Yeah. Okay. Then yeah, let's go to this question. So the reason for rejection after review. I mean, often the most common one, I guess, is that the claims made are not sufficiently supported by experiment or by theory. So the interpretation is a little bit ambiguous in many cases. And then it can also be technical concerns. So maybe the experiment was not conducted in the right conditions, or yeah, the technique is not really adapted to come to the conclusions made. And as I said, reviewers also touch on the significance of the results. So it can be not novel enough or not significant enough. I mean, often the reviewers know the literature very well, and maybe the authors forgot to cite an important paper, and then it's clear, okay, given this paper, this published paper, the results are not for us. Or the paper can lack a critical element, like a mechanistic insights. Maybe the experimental results itself are very interesting, but there is a good explanation lacking why these results are actually observed. So I guess this comes to this question. Maybe I should briefly say something about appeals, because that's something we didn't touch on yet. If there's no other questions, so yeah, feel free to appeal, first of all. Don't be afraid of choosing this option. It's always a good idea to appeal if you can directly address the concerns which led to the rejection. And of course, the most convincing way to do this is often to add new data, or can be experimental or numerical. And yeah, you can also appeal, of course, if you feel that a reviewer is biased. We look for bias, of course, but if you think there is a strong bias, yeah, you should notify us about this as well. When the other side, maybe when it's not good to to appeal is if it comes down to novelty or significance, because then it becomes much more subjective. And usually it's difficult to convince a referee about the significance of your results once they have formed their opinion on this matter. Except when they completely misunderstood the paper, then it might be still possible to have a chance. Okay, I will skip that. Are there other questions?
Not for the moment.
Okay.
Well, one just coming through here, Manan Kerri. Perhaps I can allow you to talk, Manan, since your name comes through. Would you like to present your question? If not, I can read the question out. Okay, so what happens when someone appeals? Do you send the article back to the same referee? Do you engage another referee? What's the process there after the appeal?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the standard process is that we send if we accept the appeal, then we send the paper back to the original referees. If we think that there's bias or that the review process is stuck, then we often choose the option to invite an additional reviewer who, basically to have another opinion on this. So both cases can happen. Depends a little bit on the specific example. Yeah, I mean, given the time, I think I should just stop here with the key takeaways here on the slides. And then if there are any questions about this or any other topic that I touched on, yeah, feel free to ask them now.
Okay, we have another question coming through on the topic you raised at the start, but not the direct discussion here, which is what are the key qualities required to become an editor at Nature?
Yeah, the key qualities, I mean, of course, you need a PhD degree or be a postdoc. I mean, these are like the minimum requirements. And then you need to be passionate about science. I guess that's one of the key requirements. And of course, it's more of an office job. You still will go to conferences, but you should love to read about science. If you like to do experiments or do calculations, then of course, the editor job is probably not for you. And but if you're curious about science and you want to stay in touch with the academic world, it's a great place to be, because we read a lot of fascinating science every day, and we still in touch with the scientific community. But yeah, you should be able to. I mean, also to have this view, not only be specialized on a tiny fraction, but also have this broad interest about physics in general. And
maybe I could ask a follow-up question to that. So you've been doing this job now for several years and you clearly enjoy the job. What was it that attracted you to move into this path? And what do you think it is that would attract somebody else to come down this path? What are the best parts of your job? Yeah, I mean, the best part is to read about science. I think that sums it up pretty well. And then for me, how I came to this decision, I mean, all of us know that the number of permanent positions in academia are quite limited. But I really like the academic environment. So I looked for permanent positions in this environment and I was very happy to find the one at Nature. And yeah, if you love science, but you don't see yourself struggling to find a permanent position in the academic world, then this option is a really good one. Evelyn has a similar sort of question. She asks, and Evelyn, please, we may need some follow-up to understand this question well, but she asks, what happens to young researchers? Is their research background important? Could you give some advice to those who start their career as a researcher? Evelyn, I'm not sure if this question is relating to making that career change to working in academic publishing, or a more general question. So if you'd like to clarify that, then please do. But maybe you could answer it on the point of view of moving into academic publishing, and then if it's a more general question, we'll follow up.
Yeah. I mean, you can make the step to become an editor quite early. So after your PhD or after a postdoc. I mean, I did a short postdoc of about 1 year, and then I moved on to academic publishing. So this is still at a quite early stage of the academic career. And yeah, I mean, what happens to young researchers? I mean, as an editor, we are not biased if the manuscript comes from a young researcher or from a big name. I don't know, maybe this question is also related to that. I mean, we try to be as unbiased as possible, and it doesn't matter about the name or the location or the gender or whatever about the researcher on the paper. Is there some clarification on this question, Rob? Or?
No more clarification, so I guess we should continue. Another question was, is it usually recommended to transfer the manuscript to another Nature journal? This was something you skipped over reasonably quickly.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we recommend it. In the end, it's up to you if you're happy with this choice, but the main advantage is that it speeds up the process. So if your manuscript is already peer-reviewed, and then maybe the peer review process will continue at another journal, and you don't have to start from the beginning again. So for the authors, I think the main convenience is speed.
Thanks. Since we only have a relatively short period time to go, I'm going to ask a couple of questions and maybe probe you a little bit more, Tobias. So maybe one question which is an open debate in scientific publishing more generally relates to the push, particularly strong here in Europe, towards open science. And I'm curious as to how you would position either yourself or Nature relative to that, given the policies of the journal towards releasing the results. The controversies around various different large institutions now pushing back against some of the academic publishers for the fees that they charge for publishing results behind paywalls that are being produced from public research funding. And within this also the need to produce and provide open access to not only the research record in the published paper, but the data behind that as well. So perhaps I know this is a very big topic, but maybe I could just probe you a little bit about your opinions on these topics.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, there's a push for open science, and we try to follow this push. Unfortunately, I think I have to say follow, because I think the publishing industry can be criticized for not taking a lead in this transformation. That being said, I mean, Nature has been very open to preprints for a very long time. And in the physics community, it's kind of standard to publish your results on arXiv, for example, or other preprint servers. So in most of the cases, the results were accessible in some form. It was not the formatted published paper, but the version of the submission. But yeah, I mean, now there's this push to really make everything open access, and I think it needs to be done. But then it quickly becomes a question about how the money is distributed between research institution and scientific publishers. And of course, the publishers try to ensure their income. So yeah, I mean, I can say that we are trying out different models to make this possible on a financial level. And Nature, for example, is a special case as well, because we also have science journalists, right? So it's not only about publishing your paper, but also about having the money to make sure that these science journalists can work. And then your last question was on making data available. Yeah, we're trying to push our authors really to upload not only their paper, but also the data behind the figures.
Okay. And another perhaps potentially controversial topic is in some fields at least, it's found that a significant number of high impact papers end up having flaws in them that are found later down the track. So I guess in part, there's an argument that some of this is driven towards publishing exciting papers in fields which are trendy at the time and seem to have a high impact. But particularly in fast-moving fields like the current field, where there's a lot of pressure to produce new results quickly, and there's a lot of high-impact publications coming out. Is there the risk that Nature might publish results that don't stand up to later scrutiny because it's got a strong focus on currently hot topics?
I don't know if it's related to the hot topics. I would say the risk is inherent to want to publish the most significant results, because often these results are based on, yeah, how to call this, high risk research. So usually we don't publish the research of results which are expected, because you can somehow assume that by taking this next obvious step, you will get to these results. So yes, we have published these high risk results, and some of them will end up to turn out incorrect. And the beauty of science is that they can, its ability to self-correct. But of course, the problem is that often the initial paper gets much more recognition than the one showing that, okay, actually it's a little bit more complicated, or there are flaws. Yeah, this is a problem which is difficult to fix. I mean, if there are clear flaws in the paper, we will retract it, of course. But it's part of scientific process. I mean, the results that we publish are never 100% correct, never.
We're almost at the wrap-up stage. Maybe I could ask you, you've given a lot of detail about the whole process and a lot of specific advice about all of the different steps, but maybe I could ask you to sum up just in a sentence or two, particularly for the students and the young researchers attending, your advice about someone who's got a nice result and they may be considering submitting it to Nature, or at least that's in their thought processes at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you have fantastic results, please submit them to us, and don't be, how to say, too hesitant. If you think that the results deserve to be published in a high-profile journal, submit your work to us. I admit there is like a learning process in how to write papers. I mean, you write papers differently if you write them for PLB, for example, compared to Nature. So it comes down also to what I said earlier, this ability to contextualize your results, which is often very difficult for young researchers and more easy for more experienced, because you need this broader view about science. But yeah, try to contextualize the results as best as possible, and then please submit your work to us. Good.
I have one final question, and this is not such a serious question, but I'm very curious as to your opinion about it, Tobias, before we got it. So in Social Science Quarterly, a couple of weeks ago, there was published an article which was an empirical test of the wide belief that reviewer number 2 is a uniquely poor reviewer. And the conclusion of this work was that, in fact, reviewer number 2 is not the problem. Reviewer number 3 is the problem. Reviewer number 3 gives worse reviews and is so bad that he even gets reviewer number 2 blamed for his or her bad behavior. So in your experience, is reviewer number 3 such a bad actor that they're even getting reviewer number 2 blamed for their bad reviews?
Could be. I didn't pay enough attention to these details, I guess, but No, I mean, joke aside, yeah, I also heard about this story. It sounds fantastic, but yeah, I cannot confirm this claim, unfortunately. That would be a reject, I guess.
Okay, with that, I think that we'll wrap up the discussion, Tobias. There's no more questions from the floor, but there are a lot of questions coming through. So thank you very much for taking the time to present to us and to patiently answer all of the questions that came through. It's been very interesting to get your insights into the whole process of submission, review, revision, rejection, and publication. So it's much appreciated that you could take the time to come and speak to us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity and for all the questions.
And thank you to everybody for attending. We look forward to seeing you on Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock Barcelona time for the next of our talks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna finish the meeting and I will see you all on Monday.
Okay,
Have a great weekend.
enjoy the weekend.
For the talk.